Hi, everybody, and welcome. Jeff Delto back once again for the second of two discussions with Dr. Will Thalheimer. A quick reminder, most of you probably know who Dr. Will Thalheimer is, but kind of a learning research kind of legend. He owns Work Learning Research, does a lot of great stuff for free, has a lot of great courses, has a great book on Smile Sheets. I recommend you check that out. And in the first discussion, we were talking about some commonly used training evaluation models. And in particular, we talked about Kirkpatrick, Phillips, Brinkerhoff, and Kaufman. And we're back today to learn about a model that Will made himself recently, which is called LTEM. So with that, let me say hi to Will, and thank you.
Hey, Jeff. Delighted to be here. We had fun last time. Should be good this time.
Cool. All right. I'm looking forward to it. So as I mentioned, last time we went through kind of pros and cons of 4 different common training evaluation methods. And I just explained that you have created your own kind of as an alternative, and that's called LTEM. And could you kind of tell everybody what you were thinking and what you were trying to do when you created LTEM, and why we need yet another learning evaluation model?
Sure. So as I mentioned in our last session, there's a lot of frustration that we practitioners have in regard to learning evaluation. And not only that, but our sort of learning evaluation gurus, Kirkpatrick, Brinkerhoff, et cetera, over the years have been talking about how we're not really making progress, or we're not making enough progress. So there's a lot of that. And I think we're going to use the pictures paints 1,000 words kind of thing. So let me share some slides with you.
All right, cool.
To sort of get us into this, because I think sort of the background is really important. Okay.
And we've got the, yeah, there you go. That's the view you want.
Good. So, as I mentioned before, the dominant model, the Kirkpatrick itself 4-level model, has a lot of criticisms, including from folks that are the research folks. Let me do that again. You're going to edit, right?
Yep, if we need to.
So as I mentioned before, and we talked about this in the last session, the Kirkpatrick itself 4-level model has a lot of criticism about it, including folks from the research side. You can see some evidence of that here. I didn't show you this last week, but I love this quote. Towards Maturity, it's a UK-based organization, but they did a global survey of L&D leaders, and 97% of those leaders felt that they wanted to improve the way they gathered and analyzed data on learning impact. So a lot of issues there. I mentioned last time that I've compiled 54 common evaluation mistakes, so clearly we're not doing as well as we might be doing. Now there's one other thing to sort of motivate my interest in why to create a new evaluation form, and that's that we really ought to align it with how learning works. So I'm going to do a little deep dive into the learning and forgetting curves to put evaluation in perspective.
All right.
So we've got, this is during learning over here on the left. We've got after learning over here. Toward the top of this, we're representing more remembering, and toward the bottom, we're representing less remembering. So when our learners learn, they're going to go up a learning curve, and then they're going to slide down. Most likely, they're going to slide down a forgetting curve. And so from a learning design standpoint, we have to pay attention to this. But let's think about what this means in terms of learning evaluation. But first, the big picture. So we do have our learning curve, and I've drawn one here, but it could be more steep, it could be less steep. And then our forgetting curves could be really steep. People could forget really rapidly, or they could forget less rapidly. But also what we ideally hope is that when people go back to their jobs after their training, after their learning intervention, after their e-learning, that they'll continue to learn, and hopefully we've set them up in that way. So this sort of future after learning really depends on 2 things. And I'm oversimplifying here, but basically on the design of the learning and on the after learning follow-up. If people are interested in learning more, thinking more about the learning and forgetting curves, they can go to this YouTube video.
And I'll
But
include
let's
that
think
link.
about this in terms of learning evaluation now. So if we do an assessment at the end of a learning intervention, at the end of a training, what does that tell us? Well, it's a little bit, we got to be a little bit careful, because if we measure there, in some way it's a bias metric, and we know that, probably a lot of people are going to be forgetting. So it sort of makes us look better than we are. Gives us feedback that we're doing really well when maybe we could be doing better. But even more importantly than that, what we're doing is measuring, we're taking a snapshot at that point in time on the level of understanding of our learners. What it's not telling us is whether they're going to be able to remember and whether they're going to be able to apply what they've learned. So evaluating right at the end of learning or during learning or right after learning really sets us up to be missing out on some things. If we want to get a sense of remembering an application, ideally we're going to use delayed tests. Okay, that's really the only way to be sure. Now we can get some hints during or right after training, but we can't know for sure. So this kind of thinking about evaluation in terms of learning is really important, so that when we go forward and design our learning evaluation models, that they are becoming most useful to us.
Gotcha.
So let me just summarize what I'm saying here, why I created this new learning evaluation model. We have a history of frustration in learning evaluation. There's fundamental biases in the way we measure learning. For example, what I just showed you, we tend to measure at the end of learning, and that's really biased. There's lots of common mistakes we make, and the dominant evaluation model that we're all using is flawed. So lots of reasons there. And again, I mentioned this last time, but we're really trying to create an evaluation approach that's more muscular, that really gives us more benefit, particularly in terms of us helping us make our most important decisions and helping us get the resources and support we need. So that's sort of the background on why I decided that maybe we need to think about a new evaluation model.
All right, great. I had forgotten from the first discussion how much work you put into the visuals here. So thanks again for that. That was fantastic. And for those listening out there, Will did mention Towards Maturity. I just want to give a hat tip to them. They do a lot of great work. And with that, Will, could you, your LTEM model has kind of 8 tiers, kind of represented chronologically in your graph. Can you kind of walk us through the 8 tiers of LTEM, please? And maybe tell us what LTEM stands for?
Sure, I'll do both.
All right.
And again, since a picture paints 1,000 words, let me go back to the, okay. Okay, so LTEM stands for the Learning Transfer Evaluation Model. And it is a 1-page model with 8 tiers in it. And I'm going to go through those in a minute. But it's also got a 34-page report that goes along with it to give people a sense of what it means, why it's developed this way, why it works this way. So that's the big picture. Let me show you now the, well, let me also emphasize that this was an iterative process. It's gone through 12 iterations. It's sort of at a stable iteration now. But I didn't do this alone either. Lots of people that, some of the smartest people in the learning and development field, you can see their names listed here, gave me a lot of good feedback and helped me make this better over time. So this is not, this is not me alone. Okay, one of the things I like to emphasize when I talk about the LTEM model is this subtitle, Sending Messages to Enable Learning Effectiveness. And that is based on my thinking that when we have a model, we ought to make sure that that model is useful to us, that it pushes us and nudges us in the right directions to do good things, to think about things in the right way versus leaving things out. So you can see the one-page model, and note at the bottom, tiers 1 and 2 and a little bit of 3. These are in red, and I did this with the idea that red is bad, and I learned, globally that that's not always the case. Some cultures red is better, but that was the idea there. So these things at the bottom aren't as good, and then the yellow is sort of mediocre, and then the green are better. Okay, so that's the big picture. Now I'll go through each one of the steps.
Bill, before you do, can I ask a quick question about the color coding?
Sure.
In a Western American traffic signal way, if I'm told that red is bad, I'm thinking I shouldn't do it. But I assume that's not your point. I think your point is maybe don't stop here or don't rely fully on this. Is that correct?
That is well. It's a little complicated because yes, you probably you can continue to do these things, but you don't want to do these things as a way to validate your success. Okay. So it's not. Let's look at this attendance tier 1 as an example. So a learner is going to sign up, start, attend, or complete a learning experience. And look at the fine print here in the blue. This metric is inadequate to validate learning success because learners may attend but not learn. Now, so that doesn't mean that we shouldn't check attendance or monitor our completion rate, but what it does mean is we should not use that as a measure of our success. Oftentimes, and you see this in some of the rewards that organizations are given. Oh, well, we had 20,000 learners go through our learning this year. Well, that's really not good enough, right? Because people can attend or complete but not learn.
Fair enough.
It's the same with tier 2, activity. So attention, interest, and participation, we can measure these things, and sometimes that's really good to do from a formative evaluation standpoint. But what we don't want to do is use these as measures of success because, for example, our participants could they could participate, fully and really, really engaged, but they still might not learn, or they might learn the wrong things, et cetera. So again, tier 2 is not good enough to validate our success. Tier 3 you'll notice this is learner perceptions, and it's divided into 2 parts. And the first part, 3A, is when we query the learner or survey them in a way that reveals insights related to learning effectiveness. So we target measures of learner comprehension, whether they've had enough realistic practice, motivation to apply after learning support, etc. And note that these measures hint at learning outcomes, but should be augmented with objective outcome measures. And 3B, this is when we query people in a way that does not reveal insights on learning effectiveness. So this is things about learner satisfaction, course reputation, and we know from the scientific research that when we ask these type of questions that the results of our smile sheets are not correlated with our learning results. So basically, Tier 3A can be represented by performance-focused smile sheets, and Tier 3B is traditional smile sheets. Either of these they're Tier 3, they're still not good enough. So they're either in the red danger range or yellow mediocre range.
Right.
So the next level.
Will, if I can interrupt for a second, just
sure.
Plug your book. Even if this is yellow, the first level of yellow, Will does have a great book on these performance focused smile sheets I recommend people pick up, and at least you'll go from red to yellow there in Tier 3.
Thanks, Joe. And notice the guy who even wrote the book on smile sheets says that they're not enough. Okay, I want to make that clear. Okay, so knowledge, and notice that learners are answering questions about facts and terminology. So knowledge recitation, this is during or right after the learning event, and knowledge retention after several days or more. So you'll note what the LTEM model adds here, really the distinction between measuring understanding and measuring remembering. And note here again, even if you measure retention, this is usually inadequate because remembering terminology does not fully enable performance. Okay, so sometimes knowledge is necessary, but it's hardly ever sufficient. Okay, so now let's go on to the green. So Tier 5, decision-making competence. Learner makes decisions given realistic scenarios. So again, we've got the distinction between understanding and remembering. This is where we're using things like scenario questions, case studies, could be realistic role plays, simulations, etc.
Well,
And
in level 4 and level 5, you're making a distinction between during or right after and after several days. Do you have any input on the length of that gap?
well, yeah, and I get into this in more depth in the report that goes along with this. Ideally, we hope people, we train them, and we hope that they can remember what they've learned for at least a week or two, right? So that they can begin to implement what they've learned. You can see in the model, I say several days or more. I usually recommend three days or more to be able to measure remembering. The thing is, we have a little logistical problem in that we might not want to wait forever because, might not want to wait a month because we probably have lost our learners. They've gone on and, back to work. So there's a little bit of logistical balancing that goes on here.
All right, fair enough. Thank you.
Tier 6 is task competence. So the learner performs relevant, realistic actions and decision-making. So this really ramps it up. So Tier 5 is decision-making, and Tier 6 is decision-making and actually doing. Okay, so this is even harder. Again, it has the distinction between understanding and remembering. Let me give you an example of the difference between 5 and 6. So I used to be a leadership trainer, and I would teach my trainees, my managers, that they should bring their direct reports into decision-making. And I would put them, it wasn't just me, but our organization, we ran computer-based simulations, had people make decisions. And so they would make decisions about what to do given particular situation. When we did that, that was a sort of Tier 5. But what we weren't measuring was, did they use the right tone of voice? Did they use the right words? Did they use the right body language? If we were able to measure that, that would bump it up to a Tier 6.
All right, good. Thank you.
Okay, so Tier 7 is transfer. When learner uses what was learned to perform work tasks successfully, as clearly demonstrated through objective measures. I'm not going to get into the difference between assisted and full transfer, not that important here. And then the effects of transfer. So we take what we learned, we transfer it, and then we get some benefits, hopefully. And these can be outcomes that affect learners, coworkers, family, friends, the organization, the community, society, and the environments. Okay, so you can see at Tier 5, we're going to be able to certify that people have decision-making competence. Tier 6, certify task competence. Tier 7, we're going to certify transfer. And Tier 8, we're going to certify the effects of transfer.
Will, if I can ask you a question on Tier 8.
Sure.
I think a lot of times when people aren't doing evaluation at all, or if they're just evaluating course completion or attendance, they're told by other learning professionals, hey, you've got to align with business goals. And that's where that conversation stops. And obviously, your Tier 8 is going well beyond business goals here. I wonder if you could just talk to us about why you thought that was important to go beyond your training must have a business goal effect.
Well, when I look at how people mostly do evaluations, particularly based on the 4-level model, is that the 4th level is results.
Yeah.
But everybody translates that into business results. And it's like, whoa, we've forgotten the learners. Don't we want to do something for them, help their careers, et cetera? And then there's other effects that can happen as well. I've been particularly struck by the work of Roger Kaufman, who talks about sort of the societal impacts. So I wanted to make sure that the model, the LTEM model, would help remind us of some of these other results that we might have.
Okay, great. Thank you. Anything more on a high-level overview of LTEM?
Well, yeah, just to clarify. So Tier 7 and 8, this is actual work performance. And Tier 6, 5, and down, these are performance and learning.
All right.
Sometimes these things overlap, but it's helpful to sort of separate them conceptually.
Gotcha. Okay. So in your answer to the question, oh, you're still going. I apologize.
That's right. So I talked about, a model ought to send good messages. Well, in the report that goes along with it, I've got like 25 messages that the LTEM model is intended to send. Here's some of the, here's just a few of those. And I'm not going to speak through these, but I'll let people look at these. And 1 and 2 are sort of the same as the 4-level model, but some of the other ones really go beyond what the 4-level model, the messages that it sent.
Right. I guess, do you feel when people are talking about learning organizations and learning organization theory that your LTEM message, especially tier 8 and your expanded vision of that, is more in line with what people are talking about when they're talking about a learning organization instead of just a focus on business goals like you're saying?
Well, there's a lot to the learning organization idea. And it's been a while since I've read in that space.
Mm-hmm. Well, we could put that
I don't know.
aside.
Maybe you should say some more about that. Maybe you have some insights.
Well, I mean, I think an obvious one is, if you're training and all you're measuring is your business goal and attainment of that or whatever, and you're ignoring, like you're talking about, what for example, did the learner get out of it? That doesn't seem like that your primary focus is having a learning organization and helping workers and sharing knowledge and everything. It's just a much more kind of simplistic, narrow, and I would say organizationally selfish view of learning, which ultimately might mean your organization isn't going to be, agile, won't be flexible, and won't be prepared for the future.
Yeah, well, aligning incentives is really important. And if all we're focused on are, revenues and costs, for example,
Right.
there's going to be some big holes in what we're doing. So yeah, I agree with you that, LTEM was designed, at least those tier 8 sort of recommendations, to give a more holistic view of all the stakeholders that we have and all the interests that we have.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, so I think that's it for answering that question.
All right, cool. So continuing to hammer on that business goal thing a little bit. You mentioned that that's usually where people end their what most people call the Kirkpatrick 4-level training evaluation model. And I know you've done some pretty interesting investigative journalism, and so you don't call it Kirkpatrick, you call it Kirkpatrick Catzell, and I'll create a link to people to get the backstory on that. But could you maybe just tell us like the high points of how you think LTEM is different and compares to that Kirkpatrick or Kirkpatrick Catzell 4-level model?
Sure. In fact, people ask me that all the time, and I have a little diagram to help make sense of that.
All right, cool.
So we know the 4 levels: reaction, learning, behavior, results. There's Raymond Catzell, picture of him. And so you can see LTEM on the right there. So level 1, reaction, is similar to tier 3 in LTEM. And obviously LTEM makes the distinction between different ways of querying people, but also notice the big gap or the blind spot that the 4-level model has. It doesn't send the message that just measuring attendance and measuring activity is inadequate. And it's my belief that a good model should tell us what to do and what not to do. And you can see attendance is like the #1 thing we do when we measure evaluation. So it's pretty clear that we ought to have a model that tells us measuring that is inadequate. Level 2 is similar to knowledge, decision-making, and task competence. So as I mentioned in our last session, one of the problems with the Kirkpatrick-Catzell model is that level 2 is all smashed up into one bucket. And what we tend to do is to, when we need an evaluation, we think, oh, we just need a knowledge check. Well, the LTEM model tells us that's not good enough, right? We can measure other things as well that are more potent, more powerful. Level 3 is similar to Tier 7 transfer, and Level 4 is similar to Tier 8, except obviously the LTEM model has a few more specifics. So that comparison is it in a nutshell.
Okay, good. Thanks. All right, so people might be thinking, yeah, I'd like to try this LTEM model. Do you have any tips for them about how to actually start using it?
Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm going to share 4 ways to use LTEM, but then also I'm also then going to recommend that people go look at an article written by Matt Richter, who's come up with many other ways. So assessing your evaluations, learning design and development, working backwards, credentialing, spurring improved learning designs. I'm going to talk about all 4 of these things. So the first one, assessing our evaluations. So what an organization can do is use LTEM as sort of a map and do a gap analysis. So where are we now? This year we're using traditional smile sheets and we're measuring attendance. Those are our things. Well, maybe next year, in 2020, we're going to ramp it up. We'll use performance-focused smile sheets and we'll begin using scenario questions, for example. And then maybe the following year on our strategically important courses, we'll measure transfer and the effects of transfer. So very simple. Where are we now? What could we be doing better? A really powerful method, I think.
Yeah, I like to that you're doing it. You're suggesting doing it in a kind of iterative fashion, so that it's not too intimidating to feel like I have to go out and do all this tomorrow.
Well, and that's one thing to emphasize, and I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of people look at this and say, well, do we have to do all these things? No, absolutely not. This is just, let's do better than we were doing before, right? One of the things when we talk about evaluation, we have to always balance the benefits we get from evaluation with the costs and the time and the effort. And so we don't want to be doing everything around evaluation. We want to be doing evaluation that's targeted, that's high priority, that doesn't waste a lot of resources, but that gets the information we need to be effective.
Great, and that's obviously why you mentioned the top level things, doing it for your strategically important initiatives, I think.
Yeah. Okay, second thing we can do is thinking about using LTEM in our learning design and development, in our process. So working backwards from our goals. So we know that we want to increase sales by 5%, and we think that we've done a good needs analysis, and we've figured out that we think if we could get our sales managers to coach better, that would be really a good way to do that. So then, this is a strategically important program. We want to make more money. So now we can think about how to evaluate backwards. So we're going to measure transfer by measuring how well our managers are coaching. During the learning, we're going to measure simulated coaching. We're going to have an exercise on that. We'll give people some scenario questions that they can make decisions and show us how competent they are. We'll have some if-then decisions to check out their coaching knowledge, and we'll use a performance-focused smile sheet. So again, just working backwards from our top-tier evaluation goals.
Yeah, that's great. Cool.
Another way to use LTEM is to think about credentialing. So, we've got a whole bunch of people that provide courses, right? And we want to make sure, some courses are better than others. So it'd be nice to have a way to credential how strong those courses are. We also have a bunch of learners that are going through our courses. It'd be nice to know, did they go through really strong courses, or did they go through sort of weak courses where they just got some awareness? So we can actually use LTEM as sort of a guide to credentialing. I'm going to use one of my workshops as an example. So decision-making competence, this is a tier 5. So if I can provide a course that has a good good test of decision-making competence, then I can basically let people know that this course is at LTEM tier 5. So the course I'm thinking of is my workshop. It's a gold certification course on performance-focused smile sheets. It's taught online, it's self-study, but in it, it has two assessments toward the end of the course where people are given scenario-based questions, and they have to answer these questions at a certain criteria. And when people do that, we can say something like this: those who met the requirements performed successfully on an LTEM Tier 5 assessment, showing competence making decisions in the challenging realistic scenarios. Now, if you think about a course like that, we could compare that to a course that only provides, for example, Tier 4 knowledge. And so we can use LTEM as a way to credential both our courses and perhaps our learners as well.
Yeah, kind of a more sophisticated badging.
Yeah, a way to badge, but a way that we know the badges actually mean something.
Right, right.
If people want to read about this, there's this link here as well. And the final one I'm going to share with you is using LTEM to actually improve learning designs. And this really comes out of the work with someone that is doing a dissertation using LTEM. And what they're doing is they're introducing LTEM to a hospital learning and development group. And the idea is that when you introduce LTEM, that gives the organization a sense or an ability to actually set evaluation objectives before they set their learning objectives. So they look at LTEM and they go, oh, you know, I would really like to have some task competence here, and we'd like to measure transfer. And by doing that, the idea is that the design of the learning is going to be better.
Mm-hmm.
And then the learning that's actually deployed to the learners is going to be more effective. So that's the fourth one in a nutshell.
All right, great. Anything else on that, Will?
Yeah, so just last month, a few weeks ago, Matt Richter, he's my podcast partner, but he's really loved LTEM, and he says he wrote an article on it, and you can see that he uses it not just for learning evaluation, but for instructional design, for training game design, for coaching, for performance consulting, for keynoting and presenting, to ensure the focus on meaningful outcomes, not just infotainment, sales and business development, right? One of the stories he told me was, you know, I use LTEM and I talk with the folks that want me to build training for them. And I say, okay, where do you want to end up? Okay, which of these, you know, what outcomes do you want? And then we talk through that. So it's a really good way to get some conversations going with our stakeholders as well. And there's a link to that article as well. I think that's on LinkedIn.
Yeah, it is. I've read it and I found it interesting. For people listening, I'll transcribe this. I'll include that link. And it's an interesting article. And just to call out like number 6 there, this is something I deal with a lot because I do a lot of speaking at conferences. And I think Will has a course on it now. I recommend you check this out about how to give a more effective conference presentation. But I love the idea of, you know, trying to ensure meaningful outcome in your conference presentation as well.
Great.
Okay. So this was kind of a unique experience for me. And by the time I became aware of you, Will, you had already done certain things and things were out there. But I feel like I watched LTEM bubble up. I feel like, if I recall correctly, I saw some introductory articles on it. And suddenly it was like out there. There was a white paper and there was a model. I can't promise I stayed up with each of the 12 iterations. But
well, some of those were private, let me tell you.
Fair enough. But it was interesting to watch it kind of go out in the wild and watch people start to talk about it. And my, you know, I thought it was really cool, and I noticed other people did as well. But I wondered if you could tell us a little bit about how it's been received in the learning profession.
Well, it seems to be going very well. I don't really have a way to track it. You know, it's LTEM, the model and the report are available for free. People can come there. I don't even take an e-learning or an email address from people. So, you know, it's out there, and I keep hearing about it though. In fact, just today, someone wrote something about LTEM, and then somebody else said, "Yeah, I'm going to do my dissertation on this." So It seems like there's people doing dissertations. There's a lot of organizations talking about it. There's even vendors who have now like incorporated this. We compared what we're doing to Josh Burson's model and Will Thalheimer's LTEM, and all this stuff. So it seems to be resonating. I'm sure the dominant 4-level model is still bigger out there, but I think that and I'm hoping that over time that LTEM really provides value for people. And
Yeah, I think it does, both at the gut level of just asking people to reconsider what they're doing and rethink some of the things they're doing, and then also giving either a useful model or potentially useful model. I think it's useful. And I've seen it bubble up too. Like I might have something to do with this part of it, but there's an industrial hygienist who teaches safety and health management at Central Washington University who's teaching LTEM to her students now.
Wow.
Which is a little far afield, and I admit I might have played a role in that. But
Thank you.
Well, my pleasure. But my point is, I think it's probably a lot of those things there are a lot of probably tentacles out there.
Well, the e-learning guild's DevLearn conference was last week, and I didn't go, but several people told me, "Oh my gosh, Will, your LTEM models all these sessions." So yeah.
Cool.
It's good to hear. Good to hear.
So for people out there, any final tips or words of wisdom or encouragement for them who want to start improving their training evaluation game?
Sure. Well, number one, take a look at LTEM, see what you like about it, begin using it, trying it out. But even more importantly than that is sort of step back and think about, what are you trying to do? What decisions, what actions are you trying to do better? And how will evaluation, the data you get from evaluation, how will that help you in doing that? And see, that's the big picture sometimes we miss. There's a lot of people out there that gather all this data and then they tell me, well, we actually gathered this data, but we never even look at it. What's the point of that? We do evaluation for a reason. Evaluation costs us in terms of time and resources. So we're trying to get some benefit from it. And, we have to be strategic about that. But we ought to be doing that as sort of a part of our professional responsibility, if you will. We put something out there. We want to make it better. We want to be effective as possible. We want to develop sort of cycles of continuous improvement, going back to your learning organization. So,
yeah. Well, I'm glad you made that last point about those virtuous cycles of continuous improvement. And I think that's something for everyone to keep in mind. And even going back to what you said about earlier about like kind of how an organization can choose over the next 3 years to like go a little bit higher up the LTEM model. Like we don't have to have it perfect today, but if we're fighting the good fight and moving up the right trend, we're doing well.
Yeah, I think that's very important.
Cool. Okay, well, as always, thank you. We'll have this out there in the wild soon enough. I've already mentioned to a lot of people, I'm a big fan of the stuff you do. I recommend they check out your blog and your book on smile sheets and of course on conference presentations. But in general, what's a good way for people to find you and connect with you and follow you?
Well, first, before I share some links with people, let me thank you, Jeff, because you're out there all the time, not just emphasizing my stuff, but a lot of research-informed stuff. So, I really appreciate it. I know other people do as well. So keep up the good work on that.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for doing all the good work so I can share it.
Okay. So here's some links, and I think you're going to share these with people, so I won't belabor this. People can subscribe to my newsletter. And here's some contact information. I have an LTEM workshop that people can go to. And there's the LTEM link itself. There's this gold certification course. And there's also my new presentation science course as well. So those are some great ways to be in touch. And again, there's my newsletter here that keep you informed about stuff.
All right, cool. Thanks, Will. For everybody out there, again, Dr. Will Thalheimer, make sure Work Learning Research is the name of the company. We'll get you all the links you need. Go out there and get better at training evaluation, and don't beat yourself up if you're not perfect. You probably never will be.
And I'll do one other call out. Please let me know how it's going. I would love to hear your stories about your LTEM successes, your lessons learned, your obstacles, whatever. It'd be great to learn what you're up to.
Yeah, there you go. Good idea, Will. Okay, hey, thanks a lot, Will, and I'll hit pause and talk to you in a second.
All right. Thanks, Jeff.